Why was she still standing when everyone else had already decided she didn't belong? The shove came hard enough to rattle her teeth. Her back hit the cracked concrete wall, breath forced from her lungs as dust spilled from the ceiling like falling ash. Someone shouted over her. Someone laughed. The words blurred together, "Get out, stay down, you're in the way." She didn't answer. She just pressed her palms flat against the wall and waited for the shaking in her hands to stop. Outside, gunfire stitched the night, short bursts, then longer ones. The sound of men firing not to advance but to survive. They hadn't meant to push her, not really. Fear made men careless. Fear made them forget manners, and in their minds she was the easiest thing to move. A civilian, a liability, a woman with a press badge and no weapon, crouched in a building that was already half dead. She lowered her head, hair falling across her face, and did what she had learned to do long before this desert ever had a name. She became invisible. But invisibility didn't mean ignorance. Her eyes tracked everything: the rhythm of the shots outside, the pattern of return fire, the pauses that lasted just a fraction too long. She watched muzzle flashes bloom and vanish through broken windows. She counted them. She felt something old stir in her chest, something she had buried carefully for years. The Marines didn't notice. They were too busy bleeding, too busy shouting into radios that answered with nothing but static, too busy believing that the only person who could save them was the Navy SEAL sniper upstairs, the legend they had placed all their hope on. And he was running out of angles. No one saw her glance toward the stairwell. No one noticed her eyes narrowing, calculating distances without moving her lips. No one heard the quiet question forming in her mind. How did it go this wrong this fast? She already knew the answer, but she wasn't ready to tell them yet. What kind of person learns to stay silent while the world collapses around them? Her name was Brooke Sullivan, and silence had been her first language. She had learned it early, in a small house tucked into the hills where voices didn't rise unless something was wrong. Her father spoke rarely, but when he did, it mattered. He taught her that listening was a form of respect, that observation was survival, that people revealed everything if you let them believe you weren't paying attention. The Marines saw a journalist because that's what her papers said. They saw a woman who took notes, asked careful questions, and never stood in the center of the room. They didn't see the way she assessed doorways the moment she entered them. They didn't see how she always chose seats with a clear line of sight. They didn't see the discipline in her stillness. And why would they? She had worked hard to make sure no one ever did. She remembered the first time she'd learned what a rifle really was, not a weapon but a responsibility. Her father's voice steady behind her. Control first. Power comes later. She remembered the weight of the stock against her shoulder, the way breathing mattered more than strength. She remembered understanding, even as a child, that some parts of yourself were dangerous if shown too soon. When he died, she buried those parts. She chose journalism because it let her stay close to truth without becoming it, because watching felt safer than acting, because carrying a camera didn't carry the same ghosts. And it worked. For years it worked. Until tonight. A sharp crack echoed outside, different from the rest. Too close. The building shuddered as something heavy struck nearby. Brooke flinched before she could stop herself. Upstairs, the SEAL sniper shifted positions again. She could tell from the cadence of his fire that he was being suppressed, pinned, forced into a defensive rhythm that bled time and ammunition. Time they didn't have. She slid her gaze to the far corner of the room, where a body lay half-covered by rubble. A Marine who hadn't made it past the first wave, his rifle still strapped to him, untouched. Her heart thudded once, hard. No, she told herself, don't. The thought lingered anyway. What happens when the truth you've been hiding becomes the only thing that can save anyone? The RPG team appeared in her vision like an answer she didn't want. Across the street, three figures moving with purpose, one lifting the launcher, one bracing, one watching. She felt the moment stretch thin. The Marines were shouting now. Someone was yelling for the sniper. Someone else was praying. The room filled with the smell of cordite and fear. Brooke pushed off the wall. The first step felt like betrayal to herself, to the quiet life she had built. The second step felt inevitable. She crossed the floor low, ignoring the hands that reached for her, the voices snapping her name like it was a command. Her fingers closed around the rifle sling. The weight was familiar enough to hurt. She checked the chamber without thinking. Her body remembered before her mind caught up. She slid into position near the shattered window, debris biting into her elbows as she went prone. Someone shouted again, louder this time. She didn't hear them. The scope filled her vision. The world narrowed, wind, distance, movement, all of it lined up with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. She exhaled. The shot cracked clean. The man with the launcher folded like a marionette, with its strings cut. Silence hit the room harder than the gunfire ever had. She fired again and again. 3 threats gone before anyone had time to argue with reality. Upstairs, the SEAL sniper lowered his rifle. He stared. So did everyone else. Brooke shifted, already scanning for the next problem. "Machine gun," she said calmly, as if reading a weather report. "Northwest building, 2nd floor." They didn't question her this time. They watched. She fired. And the night began to change. How does belief shift when the impossible keeps happening? Minutes blurred into something unreal. Every time the enemy tried to regroup, she found them. Every time a Marine hesitated, she didn't. She moved with quiet efficiency, never dramatic, never rushed, just precise. The men who had mocked her earlier didn't speak now. They watched with something like awe and something like shame. The SEAL sniper watched too. He didn't interfere. He didn't correct her. He recognized mastery when he saw it, and it unsettled him. When the armored truck appeared, hope drained from the room. Except from her. She studied it, calculated, waited. When the shot came, it came once. And it ended everything. Afterward, when the helicopters finally arrived and the noise faded, Brooke felt the tremor hit her hands. The adrenaline drained, leaving only exhaustion and the echo of who she had been forced to remember. She slid down against the wall and closed her eyes. Footsteps approached. The SEAL stopped in front of her, didn't speak for a long moment. Then he extended his hand, not in command but in respect. She took it. Not because she needed help standing, but because some acknowledgments mattered. What does redemption look like when it's quiet instead of loud? They offered her medals, ceremonies, words that tried to wrap the night into something neat. She declined them all. Instead, she went home. Back to the mountains, back to the clearing where her father's voice still lived in the wind. She set up the old rifle with careful hands, breathed, waited. When she fired, the shot rang true. She smiled through tears. Not because she had proven anything, but because she had finally stopped running. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't demand recognition. Sometimes it waits, patient, steady, until the moment comes when acting is the only honest thing left. And when it does, it saves lives without ever asking to be seen. Why did the silence inside her feel louder than the gunfire outside? The moment after the shove lingered longer than it should have, not because it hurt, though it did, but because it reminded her of how familiar that feeling was, being dismissed, reduced, moved aside so others could take up space. Brooke stayed pressed against the wall, cheek gritty with dust, breathing slow and deliberate while chaos unfolded inches away from her. The compound groaned as another round struck the outer wall. Concrete cracked. Someone screamed. Another Marine dropped to one knee, clutching his arm as blood soaked through his sleeve. Medics scrambled, hands slick, voices tight with urgency. Orders overlapped. No one was really listening to anyone else anymore. Fear had a sound. Brooke had learned that years ago. It wasn't the screaming, it was the way voices sharpened, the way sentences shortened, the way people stopped asking if and started asking how long. How long until they were overrun? How long until ammo ran dry? How long until the building gave up entirely? She watched Captain Reeves pace between positions, radio pressed to his mouth like prayer beads, eyes darting as if looking for a miracle in the dust. Upstairs, the SEAL sniper fired again, 2 shots this time closer together. Good shots, but rushed. Rushed meant pressure. Pressure meant mistakes. Brooke swallowed and forced her shoulders to relax. Her father's voice surfaced uninvited, calm and inconvenient. When things speed up around you, that's your cue to slow down. She hated how right he always was. Another explosion rattled the windows. A Marine near the doorway cursed and fired blind through a crack in the wall. The return fire came instantly, sharp and accurate. Someone shouted for him to stop wasting rounds. Brooke closed her eyes for half a second. She saw angles, distances, a map forming in her mind without effort. The street outside wasn't chaos, it was geometry, lines of sight, overlaps, kill zones forming where no one inside seemed to notice. She opened her eyes and looked again. There, and there, and that was going to be a problem soon. Her chest tightened, not with fear but with something heavier, responsibility, the kind you didn't ask for and couldn't put down once you saw it. She shifted her weight slightly. A Marine glanced at her, irritation flaring, then looked away. To him, she was still background noise. That was fine. She had survived entire childhoods that way. When had she started noticing the moments before things went wrong? It had begun when she was small, long before rifles and war zones. When she learned to read her father's silences the way other kids read bedtime stories. When she learned that stillness wasn't emptiness, it was attention sharpened to a blade. She remembered standing beside him on cold mornings, boots sinking into frost, waiting for the world to wake up. He never rushed her, never raised his voice. He let mistakes teach their own lessons. That patience lived in her now, coiled and quiet. A Marine stumbled past her, reloading with shaking hands. He was young, too young. His eyes flicked to her camera bag, then away, as if embarrassed to be seen struggling in front of someone who didn't even belong here. She wanted to tell him it was okay to be afraid. She didn't. Fear didn't need permission. Outside, movement shifted. The pattern changed. The enemy fire slowed, not because they were retreating, but because they were adjusting. She recognized it instantly, the lull before something worse. Her pulse picked up. She leaned just enough to peer through a fractured window, careful to keep her silhouette broken by shadow. The street beyond was washed in moonlight and smoke. Shapes moved with intent now, not desperation. They were setting up. Her stomach dropped. She scanned left to right, cataloging details automatically. Debris piles, a burned-out vehicle, a low wall offering partial cover. And then she saw them. 3 figures separate from the others, purposeful, coordinated, one carrying something long and unmistakable. RPG. Her mouth went dry. She glanced upstairs instinctively, as if the SEAL sniper could see through walls. He was good. Everyone knew that. But even the best shooter in the world couldn't be everywhere at once. And this angle. He can't see that, she realized. The thought landed heavy and final. She pressed her back to the wall again, heart thudding hard enough to feel in her throat. Not your job, she told herself. Not your place. But the image wouldn't leave her mind. The launcher, the building, the inevitability of it. She imagined the impact, the collapse, the screams that would follow. Her hands curled into fists. What do you do when the life you abandoned comes back demanding to be used? She didn't move right away. That was the cruelest part, knowing what needed to be done and still hesitating. Feeling the old instincts surge while every carefully built wall inside her begged her to stay hidden. Because stepping forward meant more than grabbing a rifle. It meant admitting she had lied. To them, to herself. A Marine shouted again, something about ammo. Another explosion rocked the far end of the building, closer this time. Dust filled the air, stinging her eyes. She coughed and wiped her face with her sleeve. Her gaze drifted, unwilling, magnetic, toward the fallen Marine in the corner. The rifle rested against his body like an afterthought. Her breath caught. She remembered the last time she'd touched one. The weight, the certainty, the way the world narrowed until there was only breath and truth. She also remembered the promise she'd made herself after her father died. I won't live there anymore. The RPG team moved again. Closer now. Her jaw tightened. You don't walk away when people need you. The memory of his voice wasn't gentle. It never had been. It was honest. She pushed off the wall. The movement felt like stepping through ice. Someone noticed her this time. Hey, what are you? She didn't stop. She dropped low, crawling the last few feet as another round cracked overhead. The smell of blood and burned metal mixed in her lungs. Her fingers brushed the rifle sling. Her hands stopped shaking. That scared her more than anything else. She unclipped the weapon and rolled the Marine gently onto his side, murmuring an apology he couldn't hear. The rifle came free easily, as if it had been waiting. She checked the chamber. Loaded. Her body knew what to do before her mind could object. A shout erupted behind her, anger, disbelief, fear tangled together. She ignored it. She slid into position near the broken window, debris biting into her forearms as she went prone. Glass glittered beneath her cheek. She welcomed the pain. It anchored her. She brought the scope to her eye. The world snapped into focus. Range, wind, movement. There they were. She exhaled. Why did everything finally make sense in the moment she stopped running? Time did something strange then. It slowed, not dramatically, not cinematically, but just enough for clarity to settle in. The noise faded to a dull edge. Her heartbeat steadied. She wasn't thinking about consequences. She wasn't thinking about medals or recognition, or what anyone would say later. She was thinking about stopping something terrible before it happened. Her finger took up the slack. The rifle cracked. The man with the launcher dropped. For half a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the second shot rang out. And the third. She stayed where she was, already scanning for the next threat, because this wasn't about proving anything. It was about finishing what had begun. Behind her, the room held its breath. Upstairs, the SEAL sniper froze mid-adjustment. And in that frozen moment, before disbelief, before questions, before the story caught up with reality, Brooke Sullivan did the one thing she had avoided for years. She stepped fully into who she was. And there was no going back. How did the room change so quickly once they realized she wasn't guessing? For a few seconds after the last shot, no one spoke. Not because there was nothing to say, but because everyone inside that broken building was silently recalculating reality. The rules they thought they understood had shifted, and no one had been warned. Smoke drifted through the shattered windows in thin, lazy sheets. The enemy fire outside didn't stop, but it changed. The rhythm faltered. Hesitation crept into the gaps between shots, the subtle pause that came when men realized something unexpected was pushing back. Brooke stayed prone, cheek pressed to grit and glass, the rifle steady against her shoulder. She didn't look behind her. She didn't need to. She could feel the weight of their stares like heat on her back. Her hands were calm now. That scared her too, but not enough to slow her down. Reloading, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. The Marine closest to her stared as she swapped magazines with practiced efficiency. His mouth opened, closed. He seemed unsure which reaction was allowed, anger, disbelief, or gratitude. Upstairs, Master Sergeant Cole Brennan shifted his position without taking his eyes off her through the stairwell opening. 20 years of experience told him two things at once. First, she was doing everything right. Second, she shouldn't exist. He keyed his radio out of habit, then remembered it was dead. His gaze flicked back to the street. The angles she'd just cleared were ones he hadn't been able to touch. That bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Outside, figures scrambled for new cover. Brooke tracked them, waiting. She wasn't hunting. She was denying. Every time a weapon appeared, she was already there. "Machine gun," she said again, this time louder. "Northwest building, second floor, third window from the left." Captain Reeves followed her finger, squinting into the darkness. "I don't see." The rifle cracked. A distant silhouette collapsed. Another crack followed almost immediately. The return fire from that direction stopped entirely. Reeves stared at her like the world had just rewritten itself. "How did you know?" he asked, voice barely above the noise. Brooke didn't answer right away. She shifted, adjusting her position, scanning for movement on the rooftops beyond. "Because they're scared now," she said finally, "and scared people repeat patterns." It wasn't arrogance, it was observation. She fired again. A man running between cover fell mid-step. The Marines watched in stunned silence. These were the same men who had shoved her aside, told her to stay down, laughed when they thought she couldn't hear. Now they moved when she spoke, not because she demanded it, but because survival had taught them faster than pride ever could. When does doubt turn into belief, and what does that cost? Brennan found himself adjusting his own position to complement hers without conscious thought. He covered what she couldn't see. She covered what he couldn't reach. It wasn't coordination born of planning. It was instinct aligning with instinct. That unsettled him deeply. He'd built his career on being the final answer, the last line of defense, the one everyone looked to when there were no options left. Now, without warning, someone else had stepped into that space, someone he hadn't vetted, someone who had no rank, no call sign, no place on the roster. And yet he trusted her. He hated that. He watched her breathe through the scope, slow and controlled, like someone who had learned long ago that panic wasted energy. Each shot was deliberate, necessary. Not one extra. The enemy noticed too. The push stalled, movement slowed. Shadows that had been advancing now hugged cover, uncertain. They had expected chaos inside the compound. They had expected fear. They hadn't expected precision. Brooke felt the shift before anyone else did. The fight was changing, but it wasn't over. It never ended cleanly. It escalated. She scanned farther out, beyond the immediate threat. Her pulse ticked up again, not from fear, but from recognition. "Something's coming," she said. Reeves looked at her sharply. "What kind of something?" She hesitated, then answered honestly. "The kind they save for when they're done probing." As if summoned by her words, the sound reached them, low at first, almost lost beneath the gunfire. A mechanical growl growing louder, heavier. "Engines." Brennan swore under his breath. "Vehicle," he said, "big." Brooke adjusted her scope, tracking the source. The headlights cut through smoke like blades. Behind them, figures clustered tightly, using the bulk as moving cover. Her jaw tightened. "50 caliber," she said quietly, "mounted." The room went very still. A .50 cal didn't knock. It erased. The first burst tore through the building like it was made of paper. Concrete exploded. A support beam cracked. Marines scrambled for cover as debris rained down. Someone yelled that the wall was coming down. Brooke felt the tremor in her bones. This was the moment, the one that separated skill from desperation. She tracked the vehicle's movement, eyes narrowing. It wasn't moving fast, too heavy, too confident. They thought it was over. Brennan leaned out, sighting in, then pulled back as rounds chewed into his position. "It's armored," he shouted. "I can't get a clean." "Driver's side window," Brooke said. He looked at her. "It's not fully plated," she continued, voice steady despite the chaos. "There's a gap." Reeves shook his head. "That's a moving target." Brooke didn't look away from the scope. "So am I." What does commitment feel like when there's no room left for fear? The vehicle rolled closer, bullets tearing chunks from the compound's face. Dust filled the air so thick it tasted like stone. Someone was praying out loud now. Someone else was crying, trying not to be heard. Brooke blocked it all out. She adjusted her breathing, slowing her heart the way she'd been taught, counting between beats until the world steadied again. She waited, not for courage, but for alignment. The truck hit a rut. Just enough. The window shifted. The driver's head appeared for less than a second. That was all she needed. The shot broke the night. The impact was immediate. The vehicle lurched violently, veering off course before slamming into a structure down the road. The mounted gun went silent. The fighters behind it scattered in confusion, suddenly exposed and directionless. For a moment, no one inside the compound moved. Then the realization hit like a wave. They were still alive. Brooke lowered the rifle slowly. Her hands began to shake, not from fear, but from release. The weight of what she'd done pressed in now that the urgency had passed. Brennan stared at her, something unspoken shifting behind his eyes. Respect, yes, but also humility. He had built his life around being exceptional. And tonight, he had been reminded that exceptional didn't always announce itself. Outside, the enemy began to withdraw, their confidence shattered. The sound of gunfire faded to sporadic bursts, then to nothing at all. Brooke leaned back against the wall, sliding down until she was sitting. Her breath came out in a long, unsteady exhale. She closed her eyes. For the first time since the ambush began, she allowed herself to feel it. The fear she'd held at bay. The grief she'd buried for years. The relief of no longer pretending she was someone else. Footsteps approached. She didn't open her eyes. Not yet. Because she knew, whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. Why did the quiet after survival feel heavier than the fight itself? The gunfire didn't stop all at once. It thinned, like breath leaving a wounded lung. One shot every few seconds, then nothing. The kind of nothing that felt temporary, fragile, as if the night itself was holding still to see what would happen next. Brooke stayed seated against the wall, rifle resting across her knees. Her fingers were still trembling, small involuntary shakes she couldn't will away. She pressed her thumb into her palm, grounding herself in the ache. Around her, Marines moved cautiously, checking angles, covering doors, murmuring confirmations in low voices. No one told her to move. No one told her to stay. That, more than anything, told her how much had changed. Dust drifted through a beam of moonlight slicing across the room. Somewhere, water dripped steadily from a cracked pipe. The building smelled like burned metal, blood, and hot stone. A place that had been moments from becoming a grave now felt suspended between breaths. Brooke tilted her head back against the wall and closed her eyes again, just for a second. Her father's face surfaced without warning, not as he'd looked near the end, pale and diminished, but as he'd been in the mountains. Solid, calm, watching her not with pride but with expectation, as if he had always known this night would come. Her throat tightened. Upstairs, boots moved on concrete, then footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. She didn't need to look to know who it was. She recognized the cadence from hours of listening to him work, measured, unhurried, controlled. Master Sergeant Brennan stopped a few feet away. For a long moment, he said nothing. She opened her eyes. He looked older up close. Not fragile, just worn in the way men who carried too much responsibility often were. His rifle hung loose in his hands, forgotten. His gaze stayed on her, sharp but searching, like he was still trying to confirm she was real. "I've been doing this a long time," he said finally. His voice was quiet, not for secrecy, out of respect. "Long enough to know when I'm looking at something rare." Brooke swallowed. "You don't have to." He raised a hand, stopping her gently. "I do." He extended his hand toward her. Not a command, not an order. An acknowledgement. She hesitated, not because she didn't understand what it meant, but because accepting it meant accepting everything that had happened. It meant owning the part of herself she had kept hidden. She took his hand. He helped her to her feet, steadying her without a word. When she stood, she realized her legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else. "You saved my team," Brennan said. "You saved me." She shook her head slightly. "I did what anyone would have done." His mouth curved just a fraction. "No, you did what only you could do." They stood there for a moment longer, the unspoken weight of it settling between them. Then footsteps approached from behind him. Sergeant First Class Delgado stopped a few paces away. The same Marine who had shoved her against the wall earlier. His massive frame seemed smaller now, shoulders heavy with something that wasn't gear. He looked at the floor first, then at her. "I was wrong," he said. His voice was rough, stripped of bravado. "About you, about what you could do." Brooke felt a flicker of something sharp in her chest. Not anger, not satisfaction. Recognition. "You were trying to protect your men," she said. He shook his head once. "I was trying to protect my pride." That admission landed harder than any apology. He extended his hand. She took it and he pulled her fully upright. When he stepped back, others stepped forward. One by one, no speeches, no dramatics, just nods, quiet words. Respect earned the only way it ever truly was. Outside, the thump of distant rotors cut through the stillness. Air support. Relief rippled through the room, cautious but undeniable. Medics moved more freely now. Wounded men were stabilized, lifted, reassured. Someone laughed once, short and disbelieving, like they couldn't quite accept they were still alive. Brooke watched it all from a slight remove, the way she always did, observer first, participant second. A Marine nearby glanced at her rifle. "You okay?" She nodded. "I will be." It was the truth. What do you do with a past that refuses to stay buried? The helicopters came in low, rotors kicking up dust and debris as they settled into the courtyard. The night filled with noise again, but it was a different kind. Controlled, purposeful, almost comforting. As the wounded were loaded onto stretchers, Captain Reeves approached Brooke. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot but steady. "You don't owe us anything," he said, "but Command's going to ask questions." She managed a small, tired smile. "I figured." He studied her for a moment. "What you did tonight, it's not something you just pick up." "No," she agreed quietly. He nodded once, accepting the boundary. "Whatever you need." She handed the rifle back without ceremony. It felt heavier leaving her hands than it had when she picked it up. When the last bird lifted off and the compound emptied, the desert grew quiet again. Too quiet. Brooke stood alone for a moment, staring at the spot where the vehicle had crashed. Smoke still curled upward, thin and black against the stars. She should have felt triumphant. She didn't. What she felt was exposed. The version of herself she had kept locked away was out now, seen, acknowledged. There was no unringing that bell. Later, as they waited for extraction, Brennan sat beside her on a broken step. Neither spoke for a while. "Why journalism?" he asked eventually. She thought about it. Because telling the truth felt safer than being it. He nodded. "And now?" She looked out into the dark. "Now I'm not sure hiding is an option anymore." He glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. That's usually how it starts. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the night settle into her bones. Not crushing, grounding. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running. She felt like she was standing still long enough to decide who she would be next. And that somehow felt more daunting than any firefight. What happens after the noise fades, when no one is watching anymore? Morning came quietly, like it was afraid to wake the ghosts. The desert light crept in low and pale, revealing damage the dark had hidden. Walls chewed open by gunfire. Spent casings scattered like seeds across the floor. Bloodstains that no amount of dust could disguise. Brooke stood just outside the compound, arms folded tight against the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the scope returned. The narrowing world. The instant where everything depended on a single breath. She could still feel the trigger break beneath her finger, clean and final. She wondered if that feeling ever truly left you. Behind her, Marines moved through the aftermath with practiced efficiency. Inventory, reports, quiet jokes that tried to stitch normalcy back together. Survival had a rhythm too, and they were easing into it carefully. No one treated her like a visitor anymore. That unsettled her more than the danger had. A young Marine approached, helmet tucked under his arm. He hesitated before speaking. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say if you hadn't," he stopped, swallowing hard. "My brother was in that hallway." Brooke nodded, not trusting her voice. He gave her a quick, almost embarrassed nod in return and walked away. She let the breath she'd been holding slip out slowly. She didn't know how to carry gratitude. It felt heavier than blame. Later, in the back of a transport truck, the desert rolling past in long, silent stretches, the questions began. Quiet ones at first. Where had she learned to shoot like that? Why hadn't she said anything before? Was she military, former something? She answered what she could, deflected what she couldn't. "I didn't think it mattered," she said at one point, and realized how true that had once been. Brennan sat across from her, elbows on his knees, watching her with that same thoughtful intensity. "It always matters," he said. "You just don't always get to choose when." She looked away, jaw tight. Why does survival sometimes feel like exposure instead of relief? Back at base, the world tried to turn what had happened into something manageable. Statements were taken, timelines reconstructed. Words like extraordinary and unprecedented floated through rooms that smelled like stale coffee and paperwork. Brooke sat through it all, answering carefully, truthfully, but without embellishment. She spoke in facts, not feelings. That was how she had learned to protect herself. Still, she could feel the shift. The way officers studied her a fraction longer. The way conversations stopped when she entered a room. She was no longer just the journalist who observed from the edges. She was an anomaly. And anomalies made institutions uncomfortable. One afternoon, Brennan found her alone outside, staring at the training range. Targets stood untouched in the distance, white and patient. "You ever think about coming back?" he asked. She knew what he meant, not just to the range, but to the life she had stepped away from. "All the time," she admitted, "and never." He nodded. "That sounds about right." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I thought if I walked far enough from it, it would stay buried." "And did it?" She shook her head. "No, it just waited." They stood there in silence, the wind carrying the faint echo of gunfire from another range. Training shots, controlled, safe. Her chest ached with something that felt like mourning. When do you stop running, and what do you lose when you do? The offer came a week later, not dramatic, not formal, a quiet conversation in a quiet office. There were paths, they told her, civilian consultant, instructor, roles that didn't require her to wear a uniform or carry a weapon unless she chose to, ways to contribute without erasing who she was. She listened, thanked them, asked for time. That night she sat alone in her quarters, camera resting on the table beside her. She picked it up, turning it in her hands. This had been her shield, her way of staying close without bleeding. She set it down and stared at her reflection in the dark window. "I don't know who I am without either of you," she whispered, to the camera, to the rifle that wasn't there, to the memory of a man who had taught her both. Sleep came late and shallow. When she finally left the base, it wasn't toward another assignment. It was toward home. West Virginia rose up around her like a held breath finally released, green and quiet and unchanged in the ways that mattered. She drove the familiar roads with the windows down, letting the air carry the scent of pine and earth. The mountain waited for her. The clearing was smaller than she remembered, or maybe she was just bigger now. She set up the old target with hands that trembled only slightly. The rifle lay across the bench, worn and familiar. She hesitated. Then she breathed. The shot rang out, sharp and clean, echoing across the valley. The bullet struck dead center. Tears blurred her vision as she lowered the rifle, a laugh breaking through her sobs. "I stopped running," she said aloud, voice shaking. The wind moved through the trees, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like an answer. Why do the quiet ones chain everything without ever asking to be seen? She returned to her work eventually, still a journalist, still telling stories, but now she told them differently, with less distance, with more honesty. She never corrected people when they underestimated her. She didn't need to, because she had learned something that night in the desert, something no medal or title could give her. Strength didn't announce itself. It waited. It watched. And when the moment came, it acted. Not for recognition, not for pride, but because walking away was no longer an option. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply stands up when everyone else believes it should stay silent. Why did the ending feel less like closure and more like an opening she couldn't step away from? The ceremony happened without her. Rows of polished shoes, medals catching the light, words spoken carefully, officially, as if precision could contain what had happened. Brooke watched none of it. She was already on the road back toward the mountains, the radio off, the world narrowed to asphalt and memory. She learned about the medal later, through a short message from Brennan that read less like an announcement and more like an apology. "They wanted to do it right. I told them you already had." She stared at the phone for a long time before slipping it back into her pocket. Recognition had never been what unsettled her. It was permanence. In the weeks that followed, life tried to settle into something resembling normal. She filed stories, conducted interviews, slept in unfamiliar rooms that smelled faintly of detergent and distance. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The world felt louder now, not in volume, but in clarity. She noticed how often people spoke to fill silence, how rarely they said what they meant. She noticed how easily strength was mistaken for aggression, and how often restraint went unnoticed. She noticed herself too. The way she stood straighter without meaning to. The way her eyes still tracked exits. The way she breathed when tension entered a room, slow, controlled, deliberate. She didn't fight it anymore. She let it exist. One afternoon, while waiting for a delayed flight, a young woman approached her hesitantly. Early 20s, nervous hands, determined eyes. "I heard about what happened," she said quietly, "in the desert." Brooke studied her face, searching for expectation, finding only curiosity, maybe hope. "What did you hear?" Brooke asked. "That you didn't look like a hero," the woman replied, "and that you saved everyone anyway." Brooke felt something loosen in her chest. "That's usually how it goes," she said. The woman nodded, absorbing that like it mattered. "I'm trying to figure out who I'm allowed to be." Brooke considered her answer carefully. "No one gives permission," she said at last. You just decide when the cost of hiding becomes higher than the cost of being seen. The woman thanked her and walked away. Brooke sat back in her chair, staring out at the runway, heart quiet and steady. When does a story stop being about survival and start becoming about meaning? The question followed her everywhere. She wrote differently now. Less spectacle, more pause. She lingered on moments others skipped. The hesitation before action, the wait after victory, the silence that followed decisions that couldn't be undone. Readers noticed. So did the people who lived those stories. Emails arrived, messages she didn't answer right away. Soldiers, medics, pilots, people who had done extraordinary things quietly and never spoken of them again. They thanked her not for making them look strong, but for letting them be human. That mattered more than any headline. Late one evening, Brennan called. "I'm retiring," he said without preamble. She smiled to herself. "About time." He chuckled. "I thought you'd say that." They talked for a long while about nothing urgent, about the strange relief of endings, about the fear that followed purpose when it left. "You ever regret it?" he asked finally, not stepping fully back in. She thought of the mountain, the clearing, the echo of a single honest shot. "No," she said. "I finally learned that who I am doesn't disappear just because I choose when to use it." He was quiet for a moment. "That might be the bravest thing I've heard all year." She ended the call feeling lighter. Why did peace feel earned, not given? On her next visit home, she returned to the clearing again. Not to shoot, just to sit. The rifle stayed in its case. She watched the valley breathe, wind through leaves, a hawk circling lazily overhead. The world didn't demand anything from her here, it simply existed. She thought of her father, not as a teacher this time, but as a man who had known when to step back, who had understood that mastery wasn't about constant action, but readiness paired with restraint. "I get it now," she said softly. The words carried, then faded. She didn't need an answer. As dusk settled, she packed up and headed back down the trail. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket, a notification she ignored until she reached the car. A message from a number she didn't recognize. "I was one of the Marines you saved. I didn't know how to say thank you then. I think I do now." She read it twice, then replied with a single sentence. "Live well, that's enough." She drove away before the weight of it could settle too heavily. What remains when the moment that defined you finally lets go? Not erasure. Integration. The night in the desert no longer woke her with a racing heart. It lived in her the way scars lived, evidence, not wounds. A reminder of what she was capable of and what she never wanted to become. She was still quiet, still observant, still underestimated more often than not. And she was okay with that. Because she knew something now, something unshakable. Power didn't require an audience. Strength didn't demand validation. And dignity, true dignity, was patient. It waited through dismissal. It endured doubt. It survived being unseen. And when the moment came, when silence was no longer an option, it acted, not loudly, not for applause, but because doing nothing would have meant betraying everything it stood for. Brooke Sullivan continued on, not as a legend whispered about in barracks or footnotes, but as something rarer. A woman who knew exactly who she was, and didn't need the world to agree.